And welcome to Let 'Em Talk. I'm Paul Durienzo. We've got another great show. Our guest, returning after a number of years, is filmmaker Vagabond, who is going to talk about the film that he made a while back about Puerto Rico called Machetero, and we're going to use that to discuss more and more about the situation developing as we speak in Puerto Rico and the debt crisis that's unraveling there. And also he has another book about, another film, pardon me, about the last poets of Harlem and the Bronx and their role in, some would say, founding hip-hop music. So great show. Welcome, and
thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Great. So Vagabond, let's start by telling us a little bit about, let's start by talking about your film Machetero and talk a little bit about what you think is going on in Puerto Rico. We're going to watch a clip from the movie, and then we'll transfer into talking about hip-hop and the new movie you're doing.
I did a film called Machetero. It was started off as a short film and wound up sort of improvising into a feature-length film.
What's it like? What do you mean by machetero? What's a machetero?
A machetero is a person who works with a machete.
Right.
So they're macheteros.
Which is like a sword. It looks like a sword, but you work with it.
Yeah, and usually you're cutting cane with it, sugar cane.
Sure.
So it's a term that goes back to 19th century, end of the 18th century, when sugar was a big deal in Puerto Rico, and the people who worked cutting sugar cane were called macheteros. And then so in the 60s, there was an underground resistant movement that was called Ejército Popular Boricua, or the Popular Puerto Rican Army, that was fighting against U.S. colonialism in Puerto Rico, because Puerto Rico has been a colony in the United States since 1898. It was sort of like a spoil of war from Spain, from the Spanish-American War. So in the 60s, the Ejército Popular Boricua was affectionately called Los Macheteros. There were macheteros in 1898 who fought on the side of Spain because towards 1897, Puerto Rico was starting to gain autonomy from Spain. It's starting to gain more and more autonomy. And just when it's starting to get, its own autonomy, the Spanish-American War breaks out, and so there were macheteros that fought for Spain against the U.S.
Interesting.
So my film is about is sort of taking the idea of the machetero, sort of more of a in the way of like sort of a samurai, that whole idea of a sort of a cultural warrior. A protector of the people on the land.
Is it a story per se with a beginning, middle, and end?
Yes, it has. It's a film about a Puerto Rican terrorist, quote unquote terrorist, who was in prison, and a French journalist who comes to interview him about his decision to use violence as a means of liberation. And while that story is being told, while that interview is happening between these two characters, there's a third character who's a young kid who's growing up in the ghetto and struggling to survive, who's becoming the next machetero. And there's a sort of a little bit of weirdness, because what happens is that the kid could be a younger version.
I see.
Or he could be his own person. And I like to let people come to their own conclusions. When people ask me if I have to choose, I tell them both.
We have a clip of it, and let's look at a clip of the film Machetero, and then we'll talk about it some more based on that. So let's go to the clip.
Do you find it strange that in your struggle for freedom you find yourself in prison?
No. Just because there aren't any bars on the windows, locks on the doors, or guards at the gate, doesn't mean there aren't in prison.
Y Puerto Rico ha sido colonia por muchos años.
Freedom will be our salvation, liberation our religion, and self-determination our sanity. The ghetto will guide us in guerrilla warfare. The slum will train us to sabotage, and the barrio will teach us bomb making. Remember that book you wanted?
Yeah, what about it?
It's like a warrior's manual. A warrior's code.
Tú tienes que luchar para que Puerto Rico sea libre y soberano.
Do you really believe violence would change anything?
There's a difference between violence and revolutionary violence.
On violence, Colonialism is a fire that burns uncontrollably, consuming life and devouring land. It turns bone to ember and flesh to ash, and will eventually destroy everything in its path, unless it is confronted, starved, suffocated, or burned back. Fire must be fought with fire. Violence will only yield to revolutionary violence.
Killing U.S. congressmen and CEOs and bombing U.S. military targets is taking your freedom.
Yes.
Vagabond, great. I love your trailer. So, where can people see this film?
It's on Vimeo on demand. The website is vimeo.com/on-demand/machetero.
Right, and that's what.
And if you do a search for Machetero movie, it'll
come up and you can watch it there. Right, great. All right, do you ever show it at in a film?
Well, we in 2012, 13. I did a what they call four-walling, where you rent the theater and you have people come by, and we did that for a while. There's a fierce amount of independence in this film.
Right.
So for me, it was about. It wasn't just about the subject matter of the film itself, but every way that we made the film had to be
a guerrilla film.
Right. It's totally a guerrila film.
So
completely.
So how did you how do you do a guerrilla shot of a guy getting out of a helicopter?
We sent them on a ride, and then I asked the guys at the helicopter rental place. You know, they do the rides around the city.
Yeah.
I said, can I shoot him on the tarmac? And they said, no, we don't own the tarmac. We rent it, and it costs a lot of money. I said, well, how far can I get out before I'm on the tarmac? They said, well, you can shoot from this window, and you can shoot from these stairs here. So that shot cost me $50.
Great. So this is a true guerrilla movie.
Yeah, I mean, we made this film with pretty much it was me, the actors, and my DP. I was doing sound and looking over my shoulder and watching for cops.
Right,
so.
Right. So tell me, Reconstruction, sound by Reconstruction. When we met, you were actually a member of the band, and
I was working with those guys. It was sort of like an artist collective. So I was part of the collective. I wasn't necessarily part of the band. I was sort of like their manager, and I was documenting them on their trips. We had been to Vieques. We had been invited by the FMLN to play in El Salvador. We toured all across the country. So those were good times. And this film was essentially inspired by their album Liberation Day. And there are 7 songs. I was listening to the music while I was writing, and the songs were literally insinuating themselves into the film, and to the point where I said, okay, I'm going to relent and let the songs be in the film, because the songs actually can get more information in the story than I could in any other way. So it really was a really guerrilla production in that every single technique that we used was how do we get more information out with as little that we have. So it was that way throughout the whole production.
Right. By the way, I do believe the speakers are on, so because we're getting an echo feedback, so maybe you want to turn those down. Thank you. Let's talk. So, okay, good. Your film seems wonderful, and people should watch it. And it tells the story, and it tells the story of the independence movement of Puerto Rico.
Right. So this journalist is trying to. He's asking the hard questions. I think that what people sometimes think when they see the film is that this guy is being sort of adversarial, and I don't think he's being adversarial. I think he's asking the hard questions so that he gives the other person the opportunity to answer those hard questions.
Well, people, as a journalist, people don't understand that sometimes.
Right.
That, there's no such thing as a friendly question, in a way.
Right. Yeah.
You're supposed to really ask the deep and hard questions, and when you speak to someone of the left, it might be some probing questions to them as well, to a person on the right, and because we're trying to find the truth, and the truth is a weird thing.
It's a very strange thing, and I also wanted to highlight this idea of political prisoners, so that people understand.
And there's quite a number of people who are Puerto Rican independence fighters who are still in prison to this day.
Yeah, I mean, there's Oscar Lopez Rivera, who's still in prison, who's been in prison for going on 44 years.
Oh my God.
You know, he was one of the people that I had patterned. Pedro Taino, who's the main character, the sort of quote terrorist, him and Russell Maroon Shoatz,
Right.
who is also a huge inspiration, an amazing person who managed to just get out of solitary recently, which is good because he spent, I think, 23 years in solitary.
23 years in solitary, right? This is punishment on top of punishment.
Yeah.
When it's not enough. But obviously, independence isn't the only point of view among Puerto Rican people towards the future of the island. You have the people who want a state, and you have the folks who
want to keep it as it is.
Keep it as it is, right? And
there's people who are looking for what they call enhanced commonwealth.
Okay.
Which is another weird sort of thing, which is sort of a step towards independence, but like Big Daddy Kane used to say, there ain't no half-stepping.
Right.
So it's a weird situation. I think the problem with Puerto Rico is that it's a colony in the United States. It's been so since 1898.
Well, the debt crisis has been in the media for the last few weeks now, and the country Puerto Rico defaulted on a $58 million payment, and now they're talking about privatizing the water and sewer department, privatizing the electric company. You know, the neoliberal approach, well, if things aren't working, let's just turn everything over to private companies, and they'll pay your debts and run everything. And of course, then you lose a lot of power and control over rates and service and those kind of things.
Yeah, what very few people realize is that, you know, I think that people are looking at the debt crisis in Puerto Rico and blaming Puerto Ricans. It's got nothing to do with Puerto Ricans. When the first Puerto Rican governor was voted into Puerto Rico, and before that, governors were installed. And they had a first democratic, quote-unquote, democratic election for a governor of Puerto Rico. It seemed like they were going to get some autonomy. That governor inherited almost $1 billion of debt. And this is like in the 1940s, 1950s, okay? That's almost $1 billion, which balloons, now we're in 2015, just continue to go up.
It's like
now it's up to $74 billion.
It's like not paying your student loan. This
Right.
is what happens. People think, oh, I just won't pay it. And then one day they get a bill for a couple $100,000. And
Right.
they said, this is what happens when you don't pay it.
And so, you know, if you look at what happened prior to the Puerto Rican governor, that first governor, Muñoz Marin, coming in, you'll see that the island was essentially raped, you know, for you know, corporate U.S. interests.
Right.
And that's continued throughout the process. Because the problem with Puerto Rico is that Puerto Rico can't make any laws that the U.S. government doesn't agree with. So Congress can strike down any law. Yeah. Puerto Rico can't trade with other countries. Puerto Rico can't buy anything else except from the United States. I remember when there was when we were having this oil crisis where, you know, gas and oil was so expensive, and Venezuela wanted to give gas and oil to Puerto Rico, and we couldn't take it. Just
didn't allow
it, you know. And so I think that the debt crisis really is being blamed on Puerto Ricans when it's got nothing to do with Puerto Ricans. It's got everything to do with colonialism.
It's telling that the U.S. would not allow a country that the U.S. has problems with, and that Puerto Rican has no problems with, to not trade with Puerto Rico because it might undermine their control and authority there.
Right. And so
that's pretty colonial.
It doesn't get any more colonial. And I think the problem with, like, if you look at, people are a little bit afraid of independence because partially because of what, if you go back, look what happened when Haiti got their independence, right? So that was an example.
It was blockaded by the Western powers.
Right, but then on top of that, I mean, even throughout history, even until, you know, overthrowing governments, even, you know, during the Clinton administration, okay? You look at Dominican Republic, or you look at Cuba, and when you talk about independence in Puerto Rico, people go, we don't want to be Cuba, we don't want to be Dominican Republic, we don't want to be Haiti, right? And so there's that economic hesitation.
You call that independence, like
right? And it's like, well, I don't know if that's the thing.
Dominican Republic was invaded by the Marines when they didn't have a government the U.S. didn't like.
Yeah.
Cuba's been, you know, lived under embargo for 50 years now. Just recently lifted, partially lifted, really. And Haiti was basically undeveloped as far, you know, but in retaliation for having a black-led revolution.
Right. So those are the things that people whether they're conscious of them or not. They're not even. They may not make the connection that these people are suffering under, or these nations are suffering under neocolonialism, and that these are forces that have nothing to do with the people themselves, but are outside forces. But I think Puerto Rico could be completely different. I think that I think you can learn from those mistakes and avoid those, those potholes, right?
Well, at this point, there would any independent Puerto Rico would have a heck of a lot of people living in the United States, right?
This is
be
true,
unusual.
but people might come back.
Right.
You know what I mean? People just might come. And now, actually, there's a movement now in Puerto Rico among Puerto Ricans that they're going to stay, and that they're going to open businesses, and they're going to fight to keep what they have. I think that
is that sort of what's happening, because you don't see the same flood of immigration as you see as other countries now. Puerto Rico, you see mostly when I live in New York, it's old families been here a long time.
Right.
You don't see tons of new families coming.
Well, now the biggest population outside of Puerto Rico is actually, I think, in Orlando.
I was just reading about that.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
It's just everybody's going to Orlando, but in the 1960s we had 1950s through 30s through the 60s actually. Sorry, we had a independence leader named Pedro Bisu Campos, who was sort of like the Malcolm X of Puerto Rico, right? The Puerto Rican Malcolm X, even though he predates Malcolm and was actually an influence on Malcolm. And he said that Puerto Rico, the United States wants Puerto Rico, but they don't want Puerto Ricans.
They want the land.
So in other words, they want the bird cage without the bird. That's what is the analogy that he used. And if you look at it, what's going on today, there's this mass exodus of people leaving the island, right? You have a debt crisis in which you can't tax the people any further. These people are leaving because the taxes are getting higher, and it's becoming more and more difficult to make a living, to run a business, right? So they're leaving the island. And so what do you have left? You have, nothing, right?
People who can't leave.
Right. You have people who can't leave, right? And you have an opportunity, right, for others to come in and swoop in and pick up the bones.
They call it neoliberalism, right? American imperialism, neocolonialism. We've seen it in other countries, and it's not just related to the United States. Germany is going to do it in Greece. We've seen this over and over again. England did it to Ireland. You move in.
But if people have a hard time conceptualizing that on a global level,
the Israelis are doing it to the Palestinians.
Exactly. But if you have a trouble conceptualizing that on a global level, right? Just think about the Lower East Side. Think about Harlem. Think about Bed-Stuy. Think about Williamsburg. Think about Greenpoint. Yeah. Think about East Harlem.
Being gentrified.
Think about Hell's Kitchen. It's gentrification,
Clinton. Right? The East Village.
Right.
They change the names to these
But what do? They say the crime is too high. They don't give people services, right? They don't pick up the garbage. There's lots of drugs. There's all this other stuff. Everybody says it's terrible. Everybody wants to get out. As soon as they're out, the real estate speculators come in. They buy up all the property. And all of a sudden, next thing you know, it goes from Hell's Kitchen to Clinton.
They're putting a tower in your park to spy on you.
Right.
It's happened to us in the Lower East Side.
In Thompson Square Park. Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. I walked in, and there was a tower in the park inside of the park.
So you look at that situation, right? Which is local, which is somewhat people have experienced, right? They have experience with it. They understand it. And it's not just in New York. It's all over the world. Apply it to Puerto Rico. It's the same thing. They talk about how high the crime is, how high the electric rates are and the water rates and all these things, and people are leaving in droves, not realizing that real estate speculators and investors are looking at Puerto Rico, looking like, this is a good place to start again. I can get this for pennies on the dollar. And next thing you know, when it balances itself out, after the smoke clears and everybody goes, wow, what happened to Puerto Rico? And you want to come back, you won't be able to. Just like people who would love to come back to the Lower East Side can't come back to the Lower East Side.
You discover that if you are foolish enough to actually take the buyout when the landlord comes into your apartment and says, I'll give you $20,000 to leave, and you try finding a place with $20,000, right? It's impossible. Even $100,000.
Yeah, I mean, $20,000 would be what? Maybe a year's rent? If you're lucky.
If you're lucky to find a place, because you have to show you're making money. If you just have a bunch of cash, you're not going to say you're going to spend that pretty soon.
So I think that's what's happening in Puerto Rico. I think forget about the debt crisis. They're not really concerned about whether or not Puerto Rico is going to be able to pay it back. What they're concerned about is getting rid of Puerto Ricans so that they can come in and swoop in and
drive them out and
drive everyone out and make their make their money.
Well, one of the positive sides of Puerto Rican people coming to New York, of course, was the influence that had on the culture of New York City.
Yeah.
And had a tremendous influence on it, especially at a time when previous groups themselves were moving out. In those days, they had the opportunity to move to the suburbs, into Long Island and New Jersey, and to leave these areas open for the refugees or immigrants or whatever who came to the Bronx and New York. And we saw the birth of wonderful new, especially when you had the Afro-Latino, wonderful new cultural expressions. And one of the most interesting that came, and many people don't realize that it was a Latin Afro thing, was hip-hop.
Yeah.
And it started, some say in the Bronx, some say in Harlem, right? Depending on, and you think East Coast, West Coast hard. You never got into the Bronx Harlem thing, right? It was right across the river.
But I think that, I remember there was an older African-American man who said he lived in the Bronx. And he said the one thing that Puerto Ricans reminded black folks in America was of their African roots, because they came out with their drums and they played it, and then we realized that they were Africans too. And then so it was that sort of a strange thing, because African-Americans had been separated from their history, but Puerto Ricans that history had been a continuation in Puerto Rico, allowed to continue.
And that's when we look at Black Lives Matter and all these things, is that what's happening is that African people have been cut off from their roots for so long, and rootless people are easily dominated. That's why they cut them off as slaves in the past, in the ancient horrible days of the past.
Which gets us back to Puerto Rico, right, where they're cutting people off at their roots. Right, so that you can do whatever you want.
Become an American, like the Native Americans, they say. Send them to schools, don't learn your language, cut your hair, all those kind of things, right? So you're working on a new movie now.
I'm working on a new documentary now. We started shooting a little while ago on The Last Poets. Well, actually not The Last Poets, but Abidun Oyewole, who was one of the original Last Poets.
What were the Last Poets? To describe that for the...
Well, the Last Poets were sort of like hip-hop before hip-hop was something, They did poetry with drums, and they were the sort of like, I don't want to say the first people to ever do that, but they were the first people to do that in a big way and become globally known for it. And they cut records in 1970, 69, 70, 71, and it became a really global phenomenon. I was just in London shooting The Last Poets because The Last Poets were doing a show at the...
They're still kicking.
Yeah. Well, yeah, two of the Last Poets, along with three. There's three of them that are still working. They've been working together for the past 27 years. The Last Poets have had about, I think, 7 different members throughout the years. But Umar bin Hassan, Abidun Oyewole, and Babatunde are the core members now who are performing as the Last Poets, and they did a show in London. And I was doing a documentary on Abidun Oyewole, who I found really interesting because he wasn't just someone who was talking about revolutionary thoughts and ideas in poetry. He actually put it into action, and he was sentenced to 4 years in prison for robbing the KKK.
They sentenced him to 4 years in prison.
Yeah. That's the same. You phrased it the same. And so I thought it's an amazing story, because we always think of the KKK as being this sort of this monolithic, sort of overpowering thing. We never think of people actually going, "Oh yeah, let's just rob them. They got it coming," kind of sort of a thing. So I thought it'd be great to do.
Where did he find the KKK to rob them? Where was
he was in North Carolina. He was founding an African village in North Carolina that I think, if I'm not mistaken, still exists today. And his revolutionary fervor was becoming more and more pronounced in his life. And they needed the money to get someone out of prison, get them out of bail, and he remembered a white kid coming to him and saying, "Oh, I know the KKK keeps their money," and he said, "Okay, well let's rob them." So I thought that was an amazing story, and I thought, well, he's led such an amazing, incredible life, and he's got such wisdom that I thought he'd be a great subject for a documentary. So when I was in London, I thought, when I heard that the Last Poets were going to London, I said, let me go and shoot them in London. Specifically because the Last Poets were talking about what they were dealing with themselves. They were dealing with their own reality, not realizing that it was the reality that was in Bristol, that it was in Brixton, that it was in Deptford, that it was in Lewisham, that it was in Germany, that it was all over the world. I mean, Abby Doon the other day, he still lives in Harlem.
That's the influence.
That record traveled all over the place to the point where I think Abby Doon was in, he said a couple of years ago he was doing a show, and this woman who was a part of the IRA came up to him and said, we used to use the Last Poets to help with the IRA struggle.
Oh. So to teach, right? It's a teaching tool.
Yeah, right. And also is to recruit.
Right. So for folks, I mean, when this new movie's coming out about NWA and Straight Outta Compton and all this stuff, and of course, if people listen to their music as much as I love that music too, but the message was terrible, horrendous, totally apolitical, unpolitical to the point, right wing and reactionary in some ways, anti-woman, pro-money, all that kind of thing. It's very entertaining and very talented, but still a terrible message. Yet, and that's how people have this gangster rap thing in their head, but the true roots of hip hop are way, way different.
Yeah, they're actually, if 180 degrees on the opposite end. I mean, if the Last Poets are the godfathers of hip hop, if they are the beginning, if they're the foundation from which everything else grows, right? And you listen to the Last Poets, right? The Last Poets are talking about when the revolution comes. They're talking about their situation and struggling with their situation, which is why I wanted to shoot them in London, because it just seems weird. Like, why are we talking about these guys who started in Harlem? Why are we talking about them in London? Because their effect was that large. Their effect was global. I mean, they've played shows in Croatia.
That shows you how popular in every corner of the world.
Matter of fact, the other day, Abby Doon was telling me, because he lives in Harlem still, that his super, who is an Albanian, realized who he was finally, and said, we played your records in Albania. And Abby Doon was like, Albania? He's like, and when you think about it, right, Albania, what does Albania have to do with the African-American struggle? I think Albert Noah Washington put it best. And he said that black is a political condition. And so you can move in and out of political conditions. And I think that anybody who's feeling oppressed can identify with being black, right?
So Black Lives Matter is all lives matter.
Essentially,
it's not separate from that.
You know what I mean?
And we know that. That's what it's about. We have 20 seconds. Where can people, when are we going to see this movie?
Hopefully fall 2016. But you can check it out, our progress, on harlemslastpoet.com.
harlemslastpoet.com. And Vagabond, we will have you back when the film comes out.
I'll bring Abby Doon.
Good. Abby Doon will come. We'll see you. See you next week.